Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest in what is now a long line of examples of Boris Johnson's government creating new laws without any parliamentary scrutiny, debate or even a vote. In this case, a law to strip workers of their rights. None of this would be legal for the EU to do, so again, this is another consequence of Brexit. And anyone still trying to call the EU undemocratic should quite frankly hang their head in shame. Since Brexit, the UK is rapidly abandoning even the pretense of democracy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I get into the specifics of this particular new law, which had nothing to do with Parliament, this is the very definition of undemocratic. In this country, Parliament makes new laws. MPs are our democratically elected representatives, not government ministers. People need to be made aware, I think, that we don't vote for our government. You know, people at the moment, I may discuss in another video, are complaining about, how come this point whatever percent of the population gets to decide our next prime minister? It always does. We don't vote for our government. We don't vote for our prime minister. We don't vote for any member of the government. People think they do. And this is how the Tories get away with their outrages. We don't. We vote for an MP. That's it. You know, that most government ministers are MPs doesn't make them democratically elected for the role of government. We elect MPs to be MPs. We understand that we're giving them a say in who forms the government, but that's it. We're not voting for MPs so that they concede all power to government ministers, not all of whom are even MPs. Remember, David Frost was our Brexit minister, given a large budget of public money, a civil service staff paid for by the public, and the power to decide government policy. He's never been elected by the people for any role in his life. But he still had the power of a government minister because the government aren't elected. And although he's gone, there are still government ministers who are not even elected MPs. More people need to understand how the democracy works. The government is the executive. It's not elected by the people in this country. This is not a particularly bad thing. It's not something that needs to change because it's Parliament that has the real power. This is why it is Parliament that decides our laws. A strong government may get Parliament to nod along to a lot of its legislation that we'd rather it did not, but those MPs still decide. There still has to be scrutiny, debate and a vote of those MPs. During the height of the pandemic, the government even created new criminal offences without involving Parliament. They did this through the use of statutory instruments. Now, ministers can use these SIs to alter bits of laws, to bring bits of laws into force, things like that. But the extent to which they're being used by Johnson government exceeds their intended use. They're not supposed to create new criminal offences. They're not supposed to create new laws. They're not supposed to abolish criminal offences, as has happened with this latest assault on workers' rights. You know, and the latest is that the business secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has written a law that allows companies whose workers are on strike to hire agency staff to cover for them. Strike breaking, basically. He even boasted that this was a criminal offence until recently. He's actually boasting that what we get with the Tories are the legalisation of criminal offences. So just as unelected government ministers introduced new criminal offences during the pandemic, so now an unelected government minister is removing a criminal offence that Parliament approved of. Remember, Parliament voted for strike breaking of this sort to be a criminal offence. Parliament said that. Our representatives said that. And without getting Parliament to agree that actually it should change now, the government have just changed it. And quite aside from the serious assault on democracy that this entails, there are two massive problems with the specific law as well. The first should be obvious. There are already tight laws on industrial action. Contrary to what the Tory media might like you to believe, workers can't decide to just go on strike on a whim. I know some thought it took the piss a bit in the 1970s, but there is a rigorous process now. My personal view is that strike action is always justified if either pay or conditions have been worsened in real terms without the consent of the workers, and serious attempts at negotiation and less disruptive industrial action have failed. These conditions have clearly been met by not only the striking rail workers, but the criminal barristers, doctors, nurses, postal workers, teachers, airport staff, and many others. Some of whom, by the way, have now got their pay increase. I noticed that British Airways staff have now agreed a pay increase, which is still a real terms pay cut, but it's 8%, so it's maybe not that bad. But what does this law aim to do? It tells a company that if its workers are on strike, that company can hire agency staff to do their jobs. This means that the law is deliberately targeting the most vulnerable workers. For example, criminal barristers are on strike. Good luck trying to find agency staff to cover their absence. Do you want to be represented in court by someone who was pulled from the unemployment line, who's got 2 GCSEs? Or have you got a law degree? No. Yeah, good luck replacing barristers. It'd be a similar thing for doctors or nurses. Not easy to replace highly skilled workers with agency staff on slave wages, is it? But for lower skilled work, it's a real possibility. This is a direct attack on the very workers who are hit hardest by the government's economic mismanagement. Remember that the reason these strikes are happening is because their pay is going down in real terms. If the government managed the economy better, with lower inflation and higher growth, then it would be easier to make sure workers didn't have to suffer pay cuts. I keep saying, under the last Labour government, workers got higher pay increases and they had lower inflation. So overall, over the course of the last Labour government, median workers' pay went up above the level of inflation. Under the Tories, over the last 12 years, it's come down. It's real terms pay cuts. This is the government punishing workers for the government's incompetence. Oh, and as an aside, if you voted for Brexit, you did vote for this. This is precisely one of the things specifically warned of regarding Brexit that the Tories, people who voted Brexit enabled, called Project Fear. We specifically warned about this exact thing. This is no surprise to a lot of people. But the second serious point was brought up by a political commentator by the name of Paul Cotterill. He wondered if this statutory instrument might actually be libelous, because it claims that the strikes were brought about undemocratically. It certainly suggests it. The offending line in the memorandum appears to be, and I quote, "The government is committed to ensuring strikes only happen as the result of a clear democratic decision." Well, all strikes have to be voted on by members of the union taking action. In fact, there is legislation demanding that this is the case. If any workers did strike without the law being followed in this regard or any other regard, then their employers are permitted to enforce disciplinary action, which can include dismissal in some cases. There would certainly be no issue with replacing their labour with agency staff, because it wouldn't be a lawful strike. They didn't need this new law to do that. So whether it would be libelous or not, this line is in direct contradiction to the actual aim of this new law. Given that strikes have to follow a rigorous legal process, and given that part of that process involves polling members, and the strike will not go ahead if the members vote against it, it is objectively the case that this law aims to stop strikes that comply with the law and have been democratically sanctioned. It's a law that attacks democracy in more ways than one, and almost completely obliterates workers' rights. The government, who pretended to be outraged when P&O Ferries sacked all their British staff and replaced them with foreign labour on below minimum wage, have now just made that act pretty much legal for a British company. If a company reckons that it can get agency staff to do the work, then they never need fear a strike again. This law means that only skilled workers have the right to strike, because they are the only ones who will ever make it stick. Workers whose skills are in such short supply that their employer will never be able to replace them. They will have recourse to industrial action. Those who are at greater risk of being replaced by agency staff will not. It's a deliberate attempt to increase inequality in this country. The only silver lining here is that the economic conditions in the UK still give some power to workers. As the government are keen to point out, unemployment is low and the number of vacancies is high. This is not actually a great situation when it comes to trying to screw your staff over. After all, if the government's own figures show that we've got more jobs in the UK than the workers to fill them, thanks to cutting ourselves off from the continental labour market, then workers remain in a strong position. But that is the overall national picture. This law will still be used to oppress vulnerable workers in some parts of the country where jobs are harder to come by. It is an undemocratic weapon of widening inequality. The next general election cannot come soon enough, frankly. And I do hope the priority for the next government is making sure that these political vandals never get their hands on the reign of power again. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. Don't lick it. Click it. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.